So now that we've looked at powers and roots, what can we use them for? Well, you guys have probably all heard this one before, but if you have a right triangle, there are three sides to, of course, all triangles have three sides. In a right triangle, one of those three sides is special. It's called the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is the side that is across from the right angle. In other words, it does not touch the right angle. These other two sides, you can see, this one touches the right angle on this side. This one touches the right angle on that side. In other words, those are the two sides that form the right angle. They are each legs. So the legs form the right angle. I used to remember it because the legs make an L shape. L for legs. When we label a triangle, when we label a right triangle, we'll label the sides A, B, and C. We label typically the legs A and B and the hypotenuse side C. And there's a relationship that I'm sure all of you have heard before. In a right triangle, A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So what does that mean? Well, it means if I know the length of the legs, I can find the length of the hypotenuse. Or if I know the length of the hypotenuse in one of the legs, I can find the length of that missing leg. Then you're in trouble. A triangle has 6 pieces to it, right? 3 angles, 3 sides. You have to know at least 3 out of those 6 pieces, and they cannot all 3 be angles. So you have to have at least one side. But if you know 3 out of the 6 pieces, you can always find the others. Like I said, the only exception is if the 3 pieces you know are all 3 angles. So let's say that this here is 8 inches, and this is 15 inches. I want to find side C. So obviously these two, the 8 and the 15, are legs. One of them is going to be side A and one of them is going to be side B, and it really does not matter which one. I'm going to call this one A and this one B. So I typically write out my formula. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. And then I fill in my numbers. A is 15, so that's 15 squared. B is the 8, so that's 8 squared, equals, well, C is what I'm looking for. 15 squared is 225. 8 squared is 64. Now I have to add those together. 225 and 64 is 289. So what I have here is C squared equals 289. And while we just talked about those inverses, how do we reverse a squared? Square root. So the square root of C squared is C. The square root of 289 is 17. So side C here is 17. How do I know that it's inches? Yeah, the other sides, the legs were both in inches. It's not the 289. You had to take the square root of it. C squared was 289. So you had to square root it to get C. This can also be used for testing to see if a triangle is a right triangle. So let's say this is 15 feet here. Let's see here. Is this a right triangle? Well, to test it, I need to know which sides are going to be sides A, B, and C. And I usually start out by locating side C. C, remember, is the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is always the longest, right? If I go up here, hypotenuse was 17, that's the longest side. I guess I didn't do an example there, but the hypotenuse will always be the longest side. So here, what is the only side that could be the hypotenuse? The 115. So that has to be side C. The other two have to be sides A and B, and it doesn't matter which one's which. So I'm just going to go A and B. So my formula, A squared plus B squared equals C squared. And let's fill in my numbers. What goes in for A? 112, so 112 squared. What goes in for B? 15, so that's 15 squared. For C, 115, so that's 115 squared. So 112 squared is 12,544. 15 squared is 225. 115 squared, 13,225. If we add these together, we get 12,769. Does that work out? No, it does not. So this is not true. This is not true. So this is not a right triangle. This angle here is not a right angle. How about this one? Which one has to be side C? The 113. So let's go A and B like that. So what am I going to write in here first? 15 squared plus 112 squared equals 113 squared. Good. What is 15 squared? 225. What's 112 squared? 12,544. And 113 squared? We'll double check it, but I'm pretty sure it's 12,769. If I add those together, I get 12,769. Which is true, which means what? It is a right triangle, and where's the right angle have to be? Perfect, right there, between A and B, between the two smaller sides. The two smaller sides have to be the legs, they must form the right angle. Any questions?
When they give you different, like when you're trying to find angles and all that, when it has that little square that you drew.
Yep, this little thing here.
Indicator that it's a right.
Yes, that means it's a right angle. what it is actually is a square. And when you draw that in there, it indicates it's a square corner. So if it's a square corner, it's a right angle. That terminology actually comes from, kind of from construction, but there's a lot of things where you want things to have that square corner. Like if this is the floor of your house, you go to set up a wall. You want that wall to make a square corner with the floor. That would be the wall would be in the right place. That is the right angle for it to form. It is incorrect. And that's where that term right angle comes from, as it is the correct angle, the right angle. So I'm going to have you guys in your notes test for me. If I have a 7-inch side, a 23-inch side, and a 25-inch side, does that form a right triangle? So the 7 and the 23 have to be the legs, so we'll make those A and B. So 25 would have to be the hypotenuse. So 7 squared plus 23 squared. Now technically I really shouldn't be putting equals here. I should be putting equals with a question mark over it because I don't know if they're equal yet. I should have been doing that on the other ones too. Does this come out to be a right triangle? No. 7 squared is 49. 23 squared is 529. 25 squared is 625. This adds up to 578. So it is not equal to 625. So this is not a right triangle. So if I tell you that this is a right triangle, and I give you that this side is 24 and this side is 7, find the hypotenuse in your notes. Try that one for me. So these are the legs, so I'm going to make them sides A and B. You could put them the opposite order if you wanted to. X has to be side C. So I'm going to fill this in. 24 squared plus 7 squared. Again, you may have had 7 squared plus 24 squared. It's going to be the same thing. Equals, and I'll put X in for C. 24 squared is 576. 7 squared is 49. I add 576 and 49, I get 625. There we go. Helps if I write it in the right order. And then I have to square root. I get 25 equals X. So X is 25 inches. Any questions on that? So then what would happen if instead of giving you both legs, what if I give you one leg and the hypotenuse? Well, we know this has to be side C. I usually make my missing side side A just because it makes my life easier to do it that way. It just feels easier to me. You don't have to make the missing side side A. But I know that A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So I don't know A, so that's just A squared. What goes in for B? 14, so that's 14 squared. And for C? 50, so it's 50 squared. So nothing happens to the A squared. 14 squared is 196. 50 squared is 2,500. Now I'm solving an equation. I'm solving for A. Have to get rid of everything else. If you think back, remember we asked what's been done to the variable A. Well, A has been squared and then 196 has been added to it. To take it apart, we have to reverse that order. So we subtract 196, so that a squared equals 2,304. And then square root it. A equals 48. So you can find a missing leg. So in your notes, I want you guys to try to find for me somebody give me a number between 10 and 20. 12? Okay. So let's say this is 12 feet. This is 37 feet. Find that side. So in your notes, find that for me. So I'll label this A, B, and C. Again, 37 has to be side C, but the other two are interchangeable. I usually do make my missing side side A. So A is really side X, so it's X squared plus B is 12, so 12 squared. 37 is C, so 37 squared. So X squared plus 12 squared is 144. 37 squared, 1369. And then we will subtract 144. So that X squared equals 1225. And then we square root that. X equals 35. Where does this come into play? Well, it comes into play quite a bit anywhere where there's right angles. And there's right angles everywhere because right angles occur anywhere where you have vertical and horizontal intersecting. They'll come into play north and east or north and west intersect. Streets all intersect at right angles. And even on circles, we're not going to do much of this in this class, but if I have a tangent to a circle, the radius of a circle forms a right angle with that tangent. So right angles occur everywhere, therefore right triangles will occur everywhere. For example, let's say we're going to install a pole, whether it's for a flag pole or hang a basketball hoop or whatever. We're going to put up a pole. And this pole is 18 feet tall. We need to know when we're setting that pole up how to get it. We're assuming the ground is flat. Now this is kind of a bad example because we just put a level on the pole, to be honest. But let's say we go out here from the pole, from the center of the pole. We go out here 24 feet. How far should it be from that point on the ground to the top of the pole? Well, again, the ground hopefully is horizontal. That pole hopefully is vertical. So we form a right triangle here. The vertical forms a right angle with the horizontal. Is the piece we're looking for right here, is that the hypotenuse or is it one of the legs? It's hypotenuse. So we're going to call these A, B, and then that missing side is C. So then we plug in the numbers. A is going to be 18 squared. B is going to be 24, so that'll be squared. 18 squared is 324. 24 squared is 576. We add 324 and 576 is 900. And we square root. So 30 equals C. So that's going to be 30 feet. Let's say we have existing sidewalks. This is the cafeteria. And over here is the dorms. Students tend to cut across the lawn to the cafeteria. So we want to build a sidewalk across there. And we want to know how long that sidewalk is going to be. So how much concrete to order. Again, most of the time those sidewalks will intersect at a right angle. And let's say that this sidewalk from here to here, from here to here, let's say that that runs, let's go 350 feet. And from here to here, let's say that that runs, you ever one of those days where you just black out? Having one of those days. 750 feet. I want to know how long that sidewalk's going to be across there. Well, this is the right angle, so what I'm missing there is side C. So we'll call these A and B. So let's find our sidewalk. So A is going to be 350. B is going to be 750. And we're looking for side C. 350 squared is 122,500, I believe, but I'm going to double check it. Yes, it is 122,500. 750 squared is 562,500. That equals C squared. I add those two together. I get 685,000 equals C squared. So then I square root. What's that? It might be 827.65 feet. Not so bad. Here's one for fun. Let's say you decide you want to sneak out of the house at night. Your window is up on the second floor of the building. And the distance from your window, the bottom of your window to the ground is, let's call it 14 feet. The distance from the base of your house to the fence in the backyard is 7 feet. Your friend is going to come over with a ladder to let you out. The catch is that ladder has to fit below your window. If it's higher than your window, it's not going to fit underneath it, and you can't crawl out the window onto it. Let's say your friend's ladder is an 18-foot ladder. Will it be able to fit? Well, there's two ways you could approach this. The way I would approach it is this. Really, that 18 feet isn't there. We need to find out what that distance is and compare it to the 18 feet. So we're going to have 7 squared. That's A, B, and C. So 7 squared plus 14 squared equals C squared. 7 squared is 49. 14 squared is 196. So I add those together, I get 245 equals C squared. The square root. Square root of 245 is 15.65. So that 18-foot ladder is definitely too long. It's not going to fit. Okay. Well, enough of those. I think you guys get the idea of that. I want to spend the last 20 minutes to offer up a couple of extra credit questions for you. I know you have to get going. You'll have to just get them off the recording later. The first one is going to be a bear hunter. And the bear hunter leaves camp, from camp, walks 8 miles due south. Have a good week. Then from that point turns and walks due east. $10 miles. At which point our hunter sees yeah, no critiques on my artwork. A bear. It looks kind of like a horse, doesn't it? An anteater, yeah. There, that looks a little bit more like a bear. It's a really skinny bear, apparently. Sees a bear, shoots it, bear dies. Magic bullets, too, that curve, apparently. Our bear hunter realizes at this point is exactly 8 miles from camp. Here's your question. What color is the bear? And why? You have to be able to explain the why to get credit. The first student that emails me the answer to that or tells me the answer in person will get 10 points. Everybody else who gets it correct will get 5 points. But again, you can't just tell me the color of the bear because there's only a few different colors that bears come in. You have to be able to tell me why it has to be that color. So that is our first extra credit question. Our second extra credit question involves Bob and Steve. Bob and Steve are cousins. And they have an uncle who had no kids of his own. Who owned a big ranch. And this ranch had several cows on it. It was a cattle ranch. And even had 2 cabins on it. And a river running right down through the middle of it. So there's the big ranch. There's your cow. It's kind of like a donkey, but there's your cow. So anyway, they have several cows on it, obviously. After a couple of months of trying to run this ranch, they decide they don't like working with cows. So they decide to sell all the cows. So they go to the market, sales barn, and they sell all their cows. Now this part here is important. They sell all their cows to the same buyer for the same price per cow. The price they get per cow is equal to the number of cows they have. So what that means, well, for example, if they had 210 cows, they got $210 each, which would have been $44,100. Or if they had 130 cows, they would have got $130 each, for a total of $16,900. I will tell you this: they didn't have 200 or 300, or they didn't have 210, or they did not have 130 cows. Neither one of those are the right answer. I just put them out there as examples to show you how the price works. So the dollar amount they got per cow was equal to the number of cows they had. Well, after they sold all their cows, they were sitting around thinking, they've got this huge ranch with all of this grass growing. They're either going to have to buy equipment and start cutting that grass so it doesn't grow out of control, or do something with it. So they decide to buy sheep. And they're able to buy sheep for $10 each. So they buy all the sheep they can. All the sheep they can afford. So what does that mean? That means they have less than $10 left. Because if they had $10, they'd have bought another sheep. With what's left over, Bob, who's always wanted a goat, buys a goat. They had exactly enough left over to buy that goat. So they've spent all the money. They have no money left over from selling the cows. They've got a whole bunch of sheep and they've got one goat. So on the way home, they get into an argument. Steve did not like the idea that that Bob spent their last few dollars on that goat. Had a huge fight. So they decide they're going to go their separate ways. Bob's going to stay in his cabin. Steve is going to stay in his cabin. They're going to let that river be a natural divider right down the middle of the ranch. They're just going to stay on their separate sides, and they're going to not work together anymore. So they divide up the sheep. Only problem is there's one left over. In other words, they had an odd number of sheep to begin with. So in order to settle the argument, Bob says he'll take the goat, plus when they inherited the ranch, it came with a cattle dog, a herding dog, and Steve can take the extra sheep. So here's your question. They just put a value on that dog. What value did they put on the dog? The value of the dog must make up the difference between what they paid for the goat and that $10 that a sheep costs. So you know the dog had to be less than $10. So that is your question. And again, you can't just guess. You must be able to show me why the dog must be that value. In other words, you're figuring out what he paid for the goat. You figure out what he paid for the goat, and you can tell me what the dog's value is. Now, you might look at this and think, well, there's no way to figure it out because I didn't give you any prices other than the $10 for a sheep. Here's the hint I will give you. Make lists. The number of cows, dollar amount, number of sheep, money left over. Make those lists. You know, for example, if they had one cow, they got $1, right? So they bought 0 sheep, there would have been $1 left over. If they'd had 2 cows, well, they would have had 2 cows times 2. Oops, I don't know why I put dollars on the cows. If they had 2 cows, they would have had 2 cows times $2. They would have got $4. Still would have had 0 sheep, and they would have had $4 left over. So make those lists and look for a pattern. This one, for the first person who either tells or emails me a correct response, is plus 25 points. For everybody else, it'll be plus 15 points. Everybody after the first one who gives me the correct response, I should say. But again, a correct response not only has the correct number, but it must also explain why that has to be. You can't just find one number that it works for. You have to show me why it works for any number of cows. Okay, I think you guys have suffered enough for the day. So we'll let you guys out of here.